What's stressing you out today? What brings you a level of anxiety right now that you haven't felt in a while? And just think about that as you look ahead at this week or this month or this coming up semester. What is just affecting you that's causing you to have a sense of doubt? Because we deal with this a lot. We deal with the anxiety, the stress, the doubt that we have, and it's all related to what the devil wants you to believe versus what God in His Word wants you to believe. That's really what it comes down to. We like to put a lot of things or people or circumstances in between that, but the reality is simply that which the devil wants you to believe and that which God says is true. And those are not the same thing. And we need to understand that and grasp that. In the back of your bulletin, you see a tree that's there. And I want to walk us through an exercise as we come into Psalm 121 together. Because this is an exercise that helps us and develops us in our walk with Christ. Because at the top in the fruit area, you're going to see the emotions and the feelings. And that's easily identifiable. Today we've identified it as anxiety or doubt. But then you've got the thinking that comes down the tree trunk into the roots of belief. You say, well, how does that work? Well, let's take, for instance, we're about to start back to school. So I'm gonna bring up something as we start back school that is probably frightening for some. You know, in the last school year, there were many school shootings across the nation, not just in our own state. And some people may have a level of anxiety about that. And some of you say, well, I didn't, but I sure do now. You know, but this is the dumb world we live in. Okay? And these are the things that many of us may be thinking. You may have your own set of anxieties, but let's just walk through this one. So we have this sense of anxiety coming up because of what we've seen going on in the months and years past leading up to this particular school year. And what that does is it causes us to begin to think through some things. And they're not the right things, but this is how the devil works in our life. Is that if he can get into our mind and begin to cause us to question things, that goes all the way back to Genesis 3. She knew the truth, but the devil got her to start questioning things and got him to start questioning things. And this creates a lot of problem. So you have this anxiety. We're calling it, the shootings in the schools. And so our doubt comes into play here because we're thinking, well, okay, I'm out of control. I don't have control over that. And for many of us, that's a big problem. Well, I don't have control over that. So if I don't have control over that, does God have control over that? And so we begin to walk down this pathway of doubt. Well, this stuff's going on, but God's not handling it and God's not controlling it. And the next level of argument gets even worse. Well, can God handle it? Maybe, and this is where we get into the belief down in the roots. So we begin to believe God's unable to handle that. You say, well, I don't believe that. Well, you may not believe that, but what happens is so often we walk down this pathway. It starts as anxiety, it moves into, well, I can't control that, and if I can't control that, why is it still happening, and that frets me, and that scares me, and I've got all kinds of issues with that, but why is God not handling it? If God's not handling it, is it because He can't handle that? And so we move into a false belief system that says God can't handle it. And if we linger there too long, that's going to move over into other areas of our life. Well, if you can't handle that, well, he can't handle this. If he can't handle this, he can't handle... And so what happens is, I become my own God at that point. Because if I can't trust God, I guess I can only trust myself. And so then, you're deep into humanism. And I am my own God at that point. But you would say, many of you might say, no, that's not right. That's not right. And so we have to walk it out. We have to walk it back. And we have to say, no, 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 no. I believe God can. I am not my own God. I am not that. So if I'm not, who is? God is the God. Well, and so we have to start talking through that again and saying, well, God, if God's in control, why is God? Because He's the maker of heaven and earth. We just read that. Psalm 24:1 says the same thing. God created everything that is in the world and everything that's in it. God created it. And if God created it, He's able to control it. But here's the issue. God allowed all of us to have a freedom to choose things. And you know what? We make dumb choices sometimes. Amen. And so does the rest of the world. We've been given what is called theologically free will. And that's the freedom to make decisions. God's not standing there as a puppet master making you choose all the things. You get the freedom to choose, but we also get the responsibility of cleanup. We also have the unfortunate reality of dealing with everybody else's bad choices as they stack up. So God's given us free will, but God is in control ultimately. So when we walk it back, we begin to say, okay, this thing can happen, but in the midst of that, I know that God is in control, and I can't control that person or that person or that person. I barely can control myself. So I'm gonna choose then to believe God's got it, God's gonna handle it, and when we make that transition, joy comes in and peace comes in to begin to replace the anxiety and the stress that you had. This is just real life. This is how we deal. The problem is we don't always have that person to walk us back up. We come down the trunk of doubt, but we don't have anybody to help us back up. And that's so very important. Because sometimes we can't see it. The same thing is happening here in Psalm 121. Is this same kind of concept. Now, Psalm 120 to 134 is called the Pilgrim Psalms or the Ascension Psalms. And there's a whole history behind that the pilgrims, as they traveled in for the annual feasts, would recite these psalms as they would get closer. And they started calling them the pilgrimage psalms as they would come in. But listen to this first verse. I lift my eyes toward the mountains. Where will my help come from? Anybody look at your day and go, if God doesn't do something? You look at your week, where's my help coming from this week? Now, this is a reference, and Psalm 23 references it, and Luke 10 references it. And it's the legend about this area was, as you were coming into Jerusalem, you came through a pathway that had a lot of high walled area through that time. And what would happen is thieves and robbers would hide out in those things, and as you came through, you would get robbed or you'd get beaten or whatever. So you've got the Good Samaritan as a result of somebody dealing with that. You've got, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death in Psalm 23. And these are all suggested as references to this area that he's also looking at. I'm trying to get to Jerusalem, and I got to go through this area, and, where's my help coming from? And so he already begins to have this sense of anxiety. Am I going to get robbed? Am I going to get beaten? Am I going to get killed? Simply trying to go through this particular area. And so what's not written is something that we probably would go through. So, we have this, is this going to happen? I don't know if it's going to happen. It could happen. And so what do we do in that moment? We begin to trust in ourselves. It's the human response. It's the sinful response. So we start trying to think through all the alternate plans, right? Well, if I go here, but if this happens, I'm going to do that, and if that happens, this is going to, And we've got a whole plan for something that may or may not happen, but I got 14 alternative plans in case this, I'm ready. I'm ready to go. And we do this. And what we're doing, and not that planning is bad, but what we tend to do is we begin to trust the plan and not God. I've got it. I have it all together. No, you don't. We just don't. But we think we do. We're deceived into thinking, I've got it all. I've got an answer for everything that can come up. Let me just tell you, the easiest way for you to understand how you don't have an answer for everything that might come up, teach kindergarten for a while. I challenge you. Teach kindergarten, teach first grade. These kids, they ask you things that you're like, I have no answer for that. I have no idea what's going on there. And it humbles you. You think you've got a plan. Not until you get a bunch of 6-year-olds together, you don't. You don't have a plan. You thought you had a plan. You thought you had it all together. And so then what happens is so he begins to trust in himself. And he's going to answer himself and come back up the tree, but he's coming down the tree. Where's my help going to come from? I don't know what's going to happen here. Does God care about me? Does he not care about me? And you see where we're going. If God doesn't care, God may not love me. And if God doesn't love me, what do I have to do with that? And again, we end up back at I'm my own God. And so we say, no, I'm not. And this is what he said, that's not true. My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. My help comes from God. He made it all. I find a sense of security in that situation. And so he's able then to have some truth. And there's 6 things that God watches over right through these next few verses. You can write them down if you want to in your Bible, or you can write them on your notes. But there's 6 things that God watches over. The first thing God watches over is our steps. He watches over our steps. Verse 3, he will not allow your foot to slip, your protector will not slumber. He also watches over our sleep. Indeed, the protector of Israel, he doesn't slumber or sleep. Now, some of you don't sleep either, but you sleep some, right? Some of us really struggle with sleep. I am not that person. I try to empathize with those of you that have that problem. I do not have that problem. I mean, I sit down too long and I'm asleep. I mean, that's just especially that after dinner sitting down in the chair moment. My kids laugh at me because I sleep through about the next 30 minutes. It's just like, well, if I sit down, I'm going to be asleep. And if I lay down, I'm out. And now for the rest of you that don't have that ability to do that, you are extremely frustrated with me right now. Because you're like, I just sit there and stare at the ceiling. I don't know, how do you people do that? How do you just lay down and go to sleep? I don't get it. I don't understand. This is life, right? But God's going to watch over that. And maybe it's your non-sleep sleep. But nonetheless, God watches over that. He watches over your steps. He watches over your sleep. He's going to watch over your safety. The Lord protects you. The Lord is a shelter right by your side. He's going to watch over your safety. He said, okay, but if he watches over my safety, then how come ... Well, if he really cared about my safety, how come this happened? How come that happened? Well, if he wasn't watching over your safety, why are you here? But here's the thing. So often, we want to read this from just the physical standpoint. And we don't always want to look at it from the spiritual standpoint. God's going to protect you. And this is really difficult when you are working with a family or somebody that has a dying individual in their family. It's so hard. Because if they're a believer, if they die here, they're alive there. If they go to sleep here, they wake up there. And it's just like, I don't want you to have to face that. I don't want you to have to deal with the grief of losing that person. But let us not think that's the end of all. We don't believe in annihilationism. We don't believe that when you die, well, that's it, too bad. No, we believe in there's a life after. And that life is either spent in heaven with Jesus or not. And it's spent in a place called hell, absent of all of God. And again, we come back to the free will. You've got that choice. You've got that choice. We've been experiencing all summer people that are making that choice of faith. and then following that up with baptism. I shared with you last week, Vivian Atkinson has given her heart to Jesus. She thought she had for all these years, and came to realize that she hadn't. She had been believing a lie for all these years. Freedom to choose. He protects us, but not always in the way that we think. Because we want God to just put this protective bubble around us and have nothing ever harm us at all. That's what we want. We especially want that for our kids. God, just put that bubble around them. I don't need, I don't want them, as they go to school, Lord, protect them. Let me ask you something. What if the very harm that they might receive at school is the thing that wins thousands of people to Jesus? You okay with that? You see, what if that moment, that traveling that Southern Baptists have been well known for 50 years of praying for traveling graces. We're going to pray for them as they travel. God watch over them. God's already watching over them. We get that. God always watches. But sometimes things happen, A, because of other people's choices, and B, sometimes things happen because we need to have a moment of trust development. Am I really going to trust God if this happens? And that's hard. He protects us, but not always in the way that we think. So he's watching over our steps and our sleep and our safety, and yes, they're all going to start with S's, so you can already put that in. God watches over our stresses. The sun will not strike you by day or the moon by night. Now you think, the sun's not going to strike you by day? Come on. That's Armageddon. That's that movie. They got the asteroid coming in, and no, that's not real. In the same way, sometimes we don't always see how each other's stresses are real, but they're real to us. They're real to us. They're stressing us out. And somebody comes up and says, well, I don't know what you're stressing about that for. Well, that's not helpful. That's not helpful. Just because you aren't stressing out about it doesn't mean I'm not stressing about it. We deal with this stuff, but we never want to talk about it. We don't want to talk about that. That we stress out about things because somehow it makes us unchristian if I'm stressing. We all stress. It's a matter of what you're stressing out about, and it's also a matter of, are we as the church going to love one another through it or judge them because of it? I want to choose love over judgment. We need to love one another through the stress and not judge them. Oh, well, what kind of Christian can you be? You're stressed out about that. Yeah, room gets quiet right now, doesn't it? He watches over our suspicions. See, if I was in the C's, I would say conspiracies. But I was in the S's, so I said suspicions. The Lord will protect you from all harm. He'll protect your life. We have a lot of suspicions that go on in our life. The Lord will protect your coming and going, both now and forever. Whatever your situation is, God's going to protect your coming and your going, both now and forever. Now, if you want to read this as only a physical reality, then you need to go find a church that has a prosperity gospel, because that's what they're going to talk to you about, but that's not me. And that's not us. Bad thing happened. It always happens because of the free will and the evil that resides in our world today. Bad things happen. The world's not getting better and better and better until Jesus comes back. The world's getting worse and worse and worse and worse until Jesus comes back. And if you don't believe that, just turn on the news. It's not hard to find how the world's getting worse and worse and worse. And if, that's just what's happening. You can just look out and go, it's getting worse and worse and worse. And so if we want to say, well, he's going to protect everything. He's going to protect my wealth, and he's going to protect my health, and he's going to protect my house, and he's going to protect my home. He's going to protect my, and if anything bad happens, well, I'm just going to, then somebody comes, well, you don't have enough faith. It's not about that. It's about having faith even if it goes wrong. Am I going to trust when it all goes wrong? When it all goes south, will I trust then? Because God's watching over all these things and evaluating, are we faithful to Him? Because what does Jesus say in His parable? That when the people would stand before the master, and they had done what they were supposed to do, and the master said to them, "Come in, good and faithful servant." Are you a good and faithful servant, even in the midst of difficulty? But God's watching over this. God's not absent. God's not out of control. God is able to do everything and more than we could ever dream or imagine. I was reading through these verses, and it began to strike me. I wonder if David, as he was picking up the stones, thought about verse 3. He'll not allow your foot to slip. Your protector will not slumber. I wonder if the 3 boys who wouldn't bow down to the idol and were going to be thrown into the fiery furnace, I wonder if they were thinking about verse 4. Indeed, the protector of Israel does not slumber or sleep. As those boys were going to be thrown in that fire, Lord, I hope you're not asleep. I need you right now. How many times do we end up in the fire and we're like, God, I need you. God, I need you. And He's faithful and present in your life. That's the beautiful part of God. I wonder if Mary, as she mothered Jesus, thought about verse 5. The Lord protects you. The Lord is a shelter right by your side. I wonder if Jesus, as He stumbled up the road carrying the cross, thought the sun will not strike you by day or the moon by night. Or Jesus, as He died, said the Lord will protect you from all harm. He'll protect your life. I wonder if Paul, as he wrote about the armor from prison, said the Lord will protect your coming and your going both now and forevermore. My friends, all through the Scripture, we see how God is watching and caring. We have the greatest God. There are thousands of gods that people want to worship on this earth, but there's only one true holy God, and that is the God we worship. Amen. It is the God of the Bible. It is the God who looked down and saw us in our sin, unable to fix it, and said, "Hey, Jesus, I'm going to send my Son to die for you, who are undeserving, ungrateful, sinful, spitting in the face of God, saying, I don't need it, I don't want it." And God says, I love you this much. Amen. That even though you don't think you want it, need it, care to have it, care to talk about it, I'm going to send Jesus to fulfill everything that's necessary for you. Will you believe it? That's what it comes down. Will I believe it? Am I going to have faith? Am I going to trust when I can't see what He's doing? When I can't understand what He's doing? My friends, if I could see everything God was doing, why do I need God? If I could handle all this on my own, what do I need God for? See, the very problems in our life remind us of our need for God. So do we have that amount of faith? Do we have faith that says, God, I trust you. I don't get it. I don't understand it. And frankly, in this particular moment, I'm not real happy either. But I know you're watching. And I know you're caring. And I choose to believe what I don't see, what I don't understand, and sometimes maybe not even what I agree with, God. But I'm going to trust you through it. Do you trust Him through it? Are you trusting Him through your moment? Any one of these 6 things that are really questionable for you, are you trusting and believing in God, who gave us His all in Jesus Christ? Let's pray.